In today's video, I take a look at the Quick Tracks 3D printed tracks for the Panzer II, and I'll also run through some quick and easy steps to help you paint and weather them. G'day guys, I'm Clayton and this is Workbench Hobbies. There are two types of modeler, right? Those of us who are content to build the kits completely out of the box, and those of us who feel the compulsion to spend more on aftermarket than we do on the kit itself. Which begs the question, why are we spending so much money on aftermarket? And that leads me to my first experience with 3D printed tracks. I recently acquired the 2023 release IBG Panzer II ALSF B, and before I'd even seen it, I set about ordering the tracks online. I'd heard mixed reviews on 3D printed tracks, so I was a little apprehensive, but I thought what time was better than now, and I clicked the button and picked myself up a set of the quick tracks for this Panzer II. Opening the box, I see there are two plastic Ziploc bags of individual tracks and a smaller bag with a few tracks and a piece of wire. There was also a small instruction sheet. On closer inspection, the parts look to be really nicely resolved and require no cleanup. Given the tracks are for a Panzer II variant, they are understandably delicate and fine in the 35th scale. The smaller bag with the wire section is actually the connector tracks, and they have a cavity through the connection points, so the wire can be used to connect the track to the model. Trying to snap the links together on the model would be near impossible, so this is a really clever way to solve that challenge. The links are divided into piles to give me my 110 links per side. Assembly of the parts was somewhat simple as snapping the two sections together, although there really was a fine art to getting these parts to connect. It also required a surprising amount of force. I found the best way to get these tracks to join was to get one side of the track in the location hole and then press the other side down on the angle until it clicked into position. It took me a while to find my groove with this, but once I found the rhythm, I assembled the first side in around 30 minutes. The second side was around 20. The connector links are attached to either end of the track section, and then a small piece of wire is used to connect the two sections together. This will be glued in place on the model, however I've left it loose so it can be removed during the painting process. I'm planning to use these tracks on the relatively new IBG Panzer II, so as a comparison I decided to assemble a small length of the tracks supplied with the kit just to see if the investment in the aftermarket tracks was worth the money. Each link had 3 connection points to the sprues, so there was a considerable amount of removal and cleanup required before even thinking about assembly. The tiny nature of these parts made this quite awkward and time consuming. In saying that, the pieces look to be very nice and remarkably similar to the 3D prints. Obviously, if the manufacturers have done their homework, they should be identical, right? Once the pieces were cleaned up, the assembly was an absolute breeze. The parts just clicking together beautifully. The movement in the track section was remarkably fluid and smooth. The 3D tracks were somewhat stiff in comparison. Although I only assembled a small length of the kit supplied tracks, I'd worked out after all of the cleanup required to use them, it would take around an hour and a half per side to build them. Comparing the tracks side by side, it's very hard to say which one looks better, but if I had to choose, I'd be leaning towards the way of the kit supplied tracks because of the fluid motion in the connections. But let's see how they look under a coat of paint and with some basic weathering. As I usually do, the tracks are painted in a mix of black and red brown in about a 70-30 ratio. The dark reddish black colour is always a good starting point for your tracks. Ensure to spray along the edges to get complete coverage through the guide horns. Changing spraying angles and working in a methodical way is the best way to ensure a satisfactory coverage. By then adding yellow to the paint mix, I'm able to spray some lighter sections over the track. It's important to lay this down in a random rather than a structured way. I'm looking to add some variation to the layer, and the yellow will help achieve that. Once the paint had a couple of hours to cure, it was on to the pigment treatment. I'm looking to do an early war Panzer II located in Poland or something around that area, so I was looking for weathering colours that would reflect that. I was also looking to just make the vehicle dusty and dirty rather than muddy and wet. European earth, rubble, sand and dark earth pigments should give me the colour palette I was looking for. Each of the pigments is applied to the track length in a random way. I'm looking to create variation in the dusty tones, and all I'm doing is placing the dry pigment over the track with a soft brush. Shout out to Steve for his excellent camera work through this section. Good job, buddy. White spirit is then applied using a pipette and literally dripping it over the parts, and the capillary action sucks and pulls the liquid through the pigment and will help it settle. This stage could probably be bypassed and I could go straight to a pigment binder, but I find sometimes the pigment can be a little unpredictable, and by seeing how it settles under the white spirit, I have greater control over the end result. After about 24 hours, the white spirit has evaporated and you are left with the pigment on the part. It is relatively fragile at this stage, so I'm able to refine the distribution with an old flat brush. Once I'm happy with the look of the effect, an enamel-based pigment binder is applied over the tracks in the same way that I did the white spirit. The pigment binder, however, will create a strong bond and make the pigment far more permanent than the white spirit did. After a further 24 hours, the binder had set and I now move to polishing the leading edges. This is a super simple process and is achieved by running the edge of a graphite pencil across the high points of the track. The process is then repeated on the inside sections of the track where they would have rubbed against wheels and drive sockets. A silicone brush and gunmetal pigment can also be used in combination with the pencil. It's also possible to use the tip of your finger, but the silicone brush and the pencil just give you a greater control. Further weathering will be added once the tracks are attached to the finished model in order to tie the weathering effects together with the model, but for now the tracks are 90% complete and gives us a reasonable idea of how they're going to look on the finished model. I'd heard lots of stories about how fragile the tracks were, but that just didn't seem to be the case with these tracks. I only broke 2 links in the construction phase. One of the major draw cards of 3D tracks is there's no need for cleanup and the speed of construction. And whilst these tracks were assembled in under an hour, I must admit I was expecting that to be a little quicker. Are these 3D printed tracks worth the investment? Well, they are certainly tidy and reasonably easy to assemble, but are they better than the kit supplied tracks? I'll let you be the judge, but for me, I can hardly tell them apart to look at. But in terms of movement, the kit supplied tracks actually win out. But we're talking about using them on a static model, so it doesn't even matter. For me, it's probably down to a matter of efficiency and what your time is worth. Is saving 2 hours of your time worth $40? It's a tough one, and I'm not really sure. Maybe that's due to the tracks in this IBG kit being really good, and the question needs to be asked on a kit by kit basis. I hope this review and mini tutorial was helpful to you and you can take something from it and improve your own modeling. Thank you again for allowing me on your screens. I do not take it for granted. If I've added some value, please hit the like button and subscribe. And remember, this is the greatest hobby in the world and we are all in this together. Share it with your friends and connect with your community. It's so important. I look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. See you later.
You're fired.